Itadori Yuji, the determined main character of Jujutsu Kaisen. His goal was to protect his friends and help those who accompany him on his journey to the peak of Jujutsu. Yuji finds himself harboring the King of Curses, Ryomen Sukuna, and after Sukuna exits Yuji's body, he must follow the path to ultimate strength and become the Prince of the Black Sparks. Today we're going to be talking about exactly how strong our man Yuji is. Make sure to drop a like and sub, and yeah, let's get into it. Now, just to start off, I'm going to go ahead and clarify that I won't be covering Yuji in Modulo, as I'm making a separate video going over that specific Yuji strength alongside Gojo, Sukuna, and Deborah's and how they all compare. Now, from the very start of the series, it's absolutely clear to us that Yuji is no normal human. He was already breaking world records at the very start of the series, and as the series progresses into later arcs, but still early relative to the length of Jujutsu Kaisen in total, we get many statements, such as Yuji having physical prowess and fighting sense greater than that of Maki Zenin, someone who was literally physically gifted at birth through a binding vow. When Yuji fights Todo in the Goodwill arc, Todo comments on Yuji's speed, saying that he's superhuman, and he also says that his raw power is exquisite, and despite Yuji's small stature, he appears to be stronger than Todo himself. When it comes to picking up skills and learning as a fighter and a Jujutsu sorcerer, Yuji is no lackey either. Gojo implies this by asking Megami if he's pressured by Yuji's growth, when Megami surprisingly asks Gojo to train with him. Kusakabe also comments on Yuji's exceptional growth as a sorcerer, however he goes about a different explanation. He says that Yuji's growth is mostly because of Sukuna. He says that when people engage in sports, they repeat these same motions until their body remembers those actions or motions. Sukuna possessed Yuji, and his body adapted to Sukuna's Jujutsu the same way a sports player's body adapts when training. Now, for Yuji's actual scaling and his abilities, I'm only going to be covering Shinjuku and the very end of the Culling games, because that's where Yuji has all of his abilities and his relevant scaling. When Sukuna takes over Megami's body in the Culling games, this is a crucial moment in Jujutsu Kaisen. This is the moment where we see Sukuna outsmart Yuji with the word Enchain, which was foreshadowed a long time before in the manga. Sukuna launches Yuji back through many buildings, and this is honestly an insanely powerful punch. Like, I'm not even really sure how Yuji survived this. Like, this dude's durability is crazy. Yuji, rightfully so, is absolutely enraged, and he seems to get one of those like mental amps that shonen MCs get when they're like super angry, and this is consistent with Jujutsu Kaisen, as we know emotions can change your strength in battle. The reason I'm saying that Yuji probably got some sort of amp here is because Sukuna comments on how Yuji's like strength has increased since he last saw Yuji fight, and it doesn't really seem to be attributed to Sukuna getting weakened via Megami's output nerf, since Sukuna only comments on that nerf when he starts actually using his curse technique, and he also seems to specify it to his curse technique alone and not his physicals. Later, Sukuna also literally just says that his body can move perfectly fine. Now, Yuji goes on the offensive against the Sukuna and even manages to land a punch on him. Maki enters the fight after surviving Sukuna's Nue, and Sukuna also comments on how Maki is probably really tough because of this. Yuji seems to be keeping up with Maki's movements, and Maki even makes a remark asking Yuji if he's able to keep up with her when she speeds things up. Yuji responds by saying yes, and right after we say it, they both launch themselves at Sukuna at seemingly a similar pace. This is pretty impressive considering that I think Maki scales pretty high in speed relative to the combatants in Jujutsu Kaisen. In my opinion, Maki should bare minimum be around the Yuta level in speed, since her and Yuta are both heavy hitters, and considering they're both combatants against Sukuna on the same heavy hitter squad, it doesn't seem like there's a massive distinction between them in speed. Otherwise, them being on the similar level as heavy hitters doesn't really make sense. Also, Maki is just able to keep up with a Sukuna that was trying harder against her than he was against Yuji and Yuta. Now, he was more injured, so I won't just straight up say that she was fighting a stronger Sukuna. However, it does seem like she can keep up with Yuta in speed. It's also important to note that Maki also thinks that she should have led the attack on Kenjaku, and Todo tells Maki that this isn't possible since he can't use Boogie Woogie on her, and also tells her that Yuta and Rika's firepower is needed to take down Kenjaku's curses. Notice how he doesn't make any mark about Maki's speed in comparison to Yuta. All of these things lead me to believe that Maki should be able to keep up with Yuta in terms of speed, therefore meaning that this version of Yuji in the Culling games should be able to do the same. Now, I would say the only reasonable debunk to this is simply saying that Yuji is mental amped or rage amped like shonen MCs tend to be sometimes, and I honestly think this is pretty fair considering that I think Yuta has better speed feats than Yuji in Shinjuku anyway, at least before Yuji awakens. In the Culling games, when Yuta is fighting Uro and Ryu, him and fully manifested Rika seem to operate at similar levels of speed. However, in Shinjuku, Yuji seemingly moves at the same time as a non-fully manifested Rika. This probably scales Yuji below Yuta, since Yuta scales in speed to a higher form of Rika, and it's implied a few times that not fully manifested Rika is below fully manifested Rika. This also just makes logical sense. Now, a statement that some people may use to scale Yuji is an editorial statement, or whatever statement you call this, a weekly statement, it doesn't really matter, but it basically just says that new and old, the two main fighting forces, go on the attack, in reference to Yuji and Yuta. Now, I don't really think this statement scales Yuji's strength, seeing as how Yuji is technically the most lethal opponent for Sukuna, not necessarily because he's super tough, durable, or fast, but because of Yuji's unique soul punches. In fact, you even see Yuji's soul punches mentioned in the same exact page. Sukuna is the one who makes the bold text, and he says, "The brat and his soul-seizing punches. He'll come trying to tear me from Fushiguro Megami's body." Essentially, Yuji has these really unique CE-infused punches where he targets the opponent's soul. This means that Yuji would break the barrier between Megami's soul and Sukuna's soul, and if that happens, Sukuna loses control of his own body and he's free for the taking. Here are just a few more pages supporting why this is super important in a fight against Sukuna. Now, I have seen a couple of other scenes that people use to say that Yuji is relative to Yuta inside of their domain. One of them is when Yuji and Yuta both run at Sukuna right before they get cut up and pushed back by his slashes. My only problem with the scene is that we don't know when either of them started moving, so hypothetically, Yuji could have started a significant amount of time before Yuta, and Yuta just caught up to him. Now, I've unironically also used people say that it seems like Yuji and Yuta activate RCT at the exact same time, therefore they're relative in speed. I'm not even going to get started on this argument. This obviously makes no sense for a plethora of reasons. Now, Yuji relative to Yuta inside of Yuta's domain is also seemingly contradictory to later feats from Yuji, but I'll get into that in a second. Before that, I want to go over all of Yuji's abilities in Shinjuku. I've already kind of introduced Yuji's soul punches, but Yuji has a much wider arsenal than just that. For example, Yuji learned New Shadow style Simple Domain, which he uses inside of Sukuna's domain expansion. Sukuna also comments on how Yuji must have acquired reverse curse technique, since Shoko's reverse curse technique couldn't have healed Yuji to this degree, since when you apply RCT to other people, it's only about at half as effective as it normally is when you apply it to yourself. In the next page, he also talks about how Yuji's ability to strengthen his own body with cursed energy has improved, essentially meaning that he's stronger, faster, and more durable. Similar to Kamo and Yuji's fan-favorite brother Choso, Yuji has acquired blood manipulation. He spits a bunch of blood in Sukuna's face and then sort of points his hand at it and causes it to burst and explode on Sukuna. We also see Yuji use the famous piercing blood. Now, this is pretty much all of the relevant stuff from Yuji inside of Yuta's domain up until Maki's entrance, and might I add that this was the coldest entrance in the entire series. Like, oh my god, Maki looks so freaking tough here. Actually, I take it back. Sukuna entering the Culling games after his bath by one-shotting Ryu and then beating up Hirozu was probably tougher than this, but this is still insanely cold. Now, let's talk about Awakened Yuji, and I'm honestly kind of excited because this is where most of the real fun scaling begins. Chapter 256 is the chapter where Yuji officially awakens, and honestly, this panel where he awakens is one of my favorites in the entire series. The start of 257 is Orame and Sukuna conversing, and then we get the legendary statement that Yuji Itadori has the potential to equal Sukuna. This statement alone is the backbone for so many arguments in the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom, particularly including Yuji in Modulo. However, what I think is undeniable and true from the statement is that Yuji seems to have the highest potential in Jujutsu Kaisen, at least rivaling Sukuna. I think that if Yuji reached his full potential, he could definitely be stronger than people like Yuta at his full potential or Gojo. Now, one ability that Yuji gains and starts using after awakening are his slashes. Sukuna comments on them, however, by saying that the output is relatively low considering that he just awakened and he's not really used to them yet. He says that the real problem with Yuji is his punching accuracy, in reference to his soul punches and black flashes. Yuji's Black Flash run on Sukuna was honestly one of the most hype moments in the Jujutsu Kaisen series. Now, one thing that I wanted to clear up is a common misconception that Yuji had Black Flash Sukuna 8 times. In reality, he had only actually Black Flashed him 7 times. In fact, this is stated in the very first page of chapter 258. When Yuji's on his Black Flash run in chapter 257, we see a panel that actually shows Sukuna Black Flashing Yuji, but I guess it can be misleading since Yuji is the one primarily Black Flashing Sukuna here. But if you exclude this scene, then Yuji would in total have landed 7 Black Flashes, which is consistent with the statement. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up real quick. Now, I'm not gonna lie, there are a couple of statements that do convince a lot of people that Yuji is stronger than people like Yuta and way stronger than people like Maki, those being the 2 surpassing the King of Curses statements. And at first, when I was a more casual viewer of Jujutsu Kaisen, I believed in these statements as well. However, the more I thought about it and talked about it with other people, the more I sort of came to the conclusion that these statements don't actually really scale Yuji's strength at all. The first scan is Sukuna noticing how many Black Flashes Yuji is landing on him and asking himself if Yuji thinks he can equal him. The second one is another one of those like editorial statements where it says, "Don't just rival the King of Curses, surpass him." I honestly, like many people, used to believe that these statements were in reference to his strength. However, the more I read and thought about it, this doesn't really make sense. Nowadays, I'm more convinced that these statements are simply in reference to the number of Black Flashes that Yuji had landed on Sukuna. We see that Sukuna had only landed 5 Black Flashes, whereas Yuji had landed 7. And when Sukuna says, "Does he think he can equal me?" Yuji had only landed 4 at the time. This also makes sense considering that later in Yuji's domain expansion, where he would have a stats amp considering the environment, Sukuna is able to physically keep up and even overpower Yuji. So it seems like these statements are in reference to Yuji's Black Flash number, not his actual strength. Yo, intersection for the GOAT Choso, RIP, my boy, I love you, man. Now, my main reason for finding the entire Black Flash rush in general as not really an insane feat for Yuji is that it's stated just on a multiple of occasions that each one of Yuji's soul punches greatly weakens and damages Sukuna. And not only that, but Yuji's also hitting him with a Black Flash. So with each strike that Yuji is laying onto Sukuna, Sukuna is getting weakened essentially by a 2 times multiplier. Sukuna post Yuji's Black Flash Rush is probably the weakest, if not one of the weakest Sukunas we see in the entire series, obviously excluding Sukuna at the end of the Gojo fight. When Sukuna first pulls up against Yuta, or rather Yuta pulls up on Sukuna, We see that Sukuna is starting to regain his RCT output. However, after Yuji's Black Flash run, it stated that due to the amount of damage Sukuna had taken against Yuji, he can no longer use RCT. Now, near the end of JJK, Yuji finally gets his domain expansion, and it's stated that he learned the basics of barrier techniques when training with Kusakabe. Yuji also says that his domain was kind of just put together and he doesn't really quite understand it himself, so it seems like with that combined with the statement of Sukuna saying that Yuji's slashes are kind of weak and his output is low since he just awakened, probably means that Yuji would lose a domain clash to more refined and experienced users such as Yuta or Kenjaku. Now, I had mentioned this earlier, but Sukuna is extremely weak after the Black Flash Rush, and whilst in Yuji's domain, Yuji is also amped because of the environment of his domain, and yet Sukuna is still able to keep up with Yuji in terms of physicals, and Yuji still needs help to finish the job. It's clear that Yuji is supposed to be really strong, and he has the highest potential out of anyone in the modern era, or rather in history. However, I don't think the feats really portray, and I don't think Gege did a good job of illustrating just how strong Yuji is supposed to be. However, you could reconcile that by saying that maybe Gege brought Yuji's full potential out in Modulo. Sukuna wasn't interested in Yuji like he was against Maki, and we know that because we see specific statements and acts from Sukuna himself, such as him laughing and showing signs of excitement that indicate his interest. This means that Sukuna wasn't going all out because Uraume says that Sukuna's CE and reinforcement differs based on his interest. Once again, he was also extremely weakened against Yuji since he fought him at the end of Shinjuku. This sort of just all leads back to the fact that Yuji doesn't really have the greatest scaling, and his scaling is off of a really weak Sukuna. Like I said earlier, I think Yuji's real strength emerges in Modulo. However, I don't think that we really see a peak Yuji in Shinjuku, and I think that a lot of characters like Yuta still scale above him. But anyways, that's kind of all I wanted to cover for Yuji in this video. Make sure to drop a like and sub, and yeah, peace out.